What we really wanted to know, I think, is to start with this obsession that Peter's got with the First World War. Where did it all come from, Ben?
Yes, so we know that your granddad served in World War One.
Yep.
Did his experience influence in any way how you looked at the project?
Well, I don't really know a huge amount about his experience personally. I mean, he was in the South Wales Borderers, so I read the regimental histories of the South Wales Borderers, but I have no letters of his, no diaries of his. I don't have a single. I mean, I've seen a signature on his enrolment card. It's the only bit of handwriting of his that I've got and I've seen. He died in 1940. So I don't really. But to sort of flip the question around the other way, it did have an effect on me to the sense that, when I was listening to these interviews about, the horrible food that they were eating, the bully beef and the biscuits and the shell fire and, all the stuff that you've just seen, I just was always thinking, well, my grandfather would have experienced all this. This would have been what he ate. This would have been how he slept. So it was actually great in the way that in the lack of personal information that I've got on him, it was actually, I sort of was able to fill in some, or at least paint a picture in my head about what his life was like. Yeah.
And how old was your granddad when he joined up, Peter?
He was born in 1920. He was born in 1890, joined up in 1910. So he was 20.
How old are you, Ben?
I'm 16.
Right, it's the same, from the same part of Wales.
Yeah, that's right. I'm from South Wales as well. So,
yeah, wow.
Right, no, could have met him in a past life or something.
That could have been you, man. In fact, you got a question,
Yeah.
I think.
Well, I mean, my grandfather joining up at 20 was, as you just seen in the movie, that was sort of, this was before the war, so there wasn't the pressure for people to go in underage. So I think 20 might have even been the age before the World War I. I don't know what the age limit was, but
Well, one thing that the film does touch on,
Yes.
sorry, was that the younger people that, like, I could have been in the war at that age if I was convinced to. Do you think that this film might help the younger generation really empathise with the soldiers?
well, I mean, you should empathise. You should empathise with any human beings that you can, I mean, to have empathy is to actually, look at somebody's experience and what they're experiencing, and to actually feel for them and to understand, into some manner, imagine what they're going through. And it doesn't have to be a war; it could be anything. So, yeah, I mean, I could see quite a few recruits here. We should sign up a lot of these boys and send them over to France. It's, that's the way it was. I mean, people your age were. But you see, you weren't being dragged into the army. It was a volunteer army at that point early in the war, and everyone just went because they felt like a prat. If their two friends had gone, if their two mates had gone, and suddenly they were left there, they felt that they had to join up. So I think a lot of it was a form of peer pressure, but not peer pressure in a horrible way. They could see an adventure was coming, and their friends were going on it, and they wanted to jump on board as well.
Can I ask the audience, how many people before today have seen the black and white footage from the First World War in school or online or something? Yeah, okay, nearly everyone, right? And having just watched what you've seen today in colour with a soundtrack, has it just transformed your opinion and your feelings about the war? Yes. Okay. I think it's hard not to. Peter, is that kind of, following on Ben's question, is that kind of what you want to achieve? So rooms of people like this, the generation that never met anyone who served in the First World War, there's no personal link. Did you want them to be able to see it as kind of maybe you see it in your mind's eye?
Yeah, well, look, when you're dealing with the First World War on a film, you have to kind of make a fundamental decision, which I didn't make at the beginning, because when I started this project, I was sort of working my way through it. But you're either taking the approach of a historian, in the sense that you're going to try to, present a wider view of some part of the war and, the tactics and the battles and everything else, or you go a more personal way. And once we started restoring the footage and we saw these faces coming alive, it was clear that the more personal way to go. I mean, so that's why we deliberately edited out from the audio. We cut out any references to the Somme, Passchendaele, tried to get rid of all the dates. I wanted it to be a very agnostic, in terms of the history of the war, and simply be about the personal experience. So that's, I'm as interested as anything in seeing a documentary about the history of the war too, because the global story is very interesting. But I wanted to sort of, because it's really sort of driven by one of the comments that a soldier says. He says, all we knew and all we cared about was what was in front of us, what we could see. We knew nothing about what was happening anywhere else. We weren't told. Our entire First World War experience was what we could see. And that's, in a way, it's the sort of film I wanted to make. I wanted to make just what that experience was in having to live day to day for these guys.
Ben, I think you've got more questions about your generation, what it would have been like for people your age.
Well, that's the thing, because it seems that you said it was really hard to pick like which footage to use and which to leave out. Were there any other methods that you used to really pick like how to leave things out, because you had so much to
how to leave things out? No, I mean it's horrible. It's painful. Look, this movie, just between the group of us in this room, it's not going anywhere else, is it? I mean, this movie was supposed to be 30 minutes long. I signed up for like a 30-minute film, and I failed. And fortunately, Claire Olsen, our producer, was brilliant enough to be able to, with a 30-minute budget, we were able to make a 1-hour 40 film. Because I just, and the 30 minutes, which was all the funding that we had really at the beginning to do. And, and I just quickly became very frustrated, because 30 minutes is nothing. And I was getting depressed, because I thought, there's a film here, but 30 minutes ain't it. So that's actually why we did the black and white at the front and the back, because a lot of the money went into the colorization. So by the idea of adding a black and white chunk at the front and the end was a budgetary trick of ours to actually, because it wasn't the footage that we wanted people in our black and white, it was the voices, it was the story. That we wanted to start with the joining up and recruitment, and we couldn't afford to do any of that in colour, and we wanted to finish with the end of the war, and we couldn't afford to do that in colour. Because it was originally supposed to be sort of the idea was like the experience on the Western Front, but then I realised, well, that doesn't mean anything unless you've seen how they get there and why they get there and what happens at the end. So there wasn't a complete story. So I forget the question now. What was the question? But anyway, so the film, it found its own way. We did various tricks. I mean, you could easily make a 3-4 hour film, and also you have to realise what one you've just seen. There's so much basic First World War stuff that's not there. There's no flying corps, there's no navy, there's no factories in the UK with shells, which is the first time women came in the workforce. There's no other parts of the war other than the Western Front, which the war was fought in a lot of other places around the world. There's great stories about the colonial troops. I mean, there's a whole lot of very important aspects of the First World War that is not here. But I didn't want to do a once-over lightly with a whole lot of things. I just wanted to sort of try to focus on one aspect of it and get into it a little bit deeper than that. So it was really the life of a British soldier on the Western Front was what we ended up with. But that's there's so much other First World War experience beyond that's amazing as well.
Were you surprised by how much you learned? Because obviously you're an expert in the First World War in your own right. You've spent it's a lifelong passion of yours, that history. Did you actually learn stuff going through this archive?
Yeah. I mean, I was surprised because what I did, and I had 600 hours of audio, and I'm not quite sure. There's 120 different men talking in that film, and then probably we maybe had 200 guys or something as part of the 600 hours. And one of the things that I was very careful not to put something in that was just one guy said, So it was like one guy who could have, for all we know, made it up. He could have been not telling the truth. And so I was I didn't want to be I don't want to sort of present a false thing. So anything that we have in there, I wanted to make sure it was backed up by lots of different people saying more or less the same thing. I was certainly surprised at the attitude of the soldiers when they, all those guys at the beginning that say I enjoyed it. Those words you never expect to hear from a veteran of the First World War, and yet here they're saying it. And I'd go back there again if they asked me. I mean, all that attitude surprised the hell out of me. I was just like, that's not what we think. And then you start to realise, well, why is that? And are we now as a society beyond the death of these guys? Are we making them into victims? Now they're victims on one level because it was a war that was a horrible war that we sent, and they went to fight and they shouldn't have been there. So sure they're victims, but we've made them victims when they didn't see themselves as victims. There's no self-pity, and I think that's an important thing. Is that obviously it was we shouldn't have sent these people should never have been asked to do what they had to do, and certainly it was a very tragic experience on that level. But when you hear them, they're so pragmatic. We just had to get on with it. It was a job. We knew it was going to be rough, and it was rough. I mean, they're not victimising themselves, and yet now that they're all dead, we are victimising them in a different kind of way, and that was interesting. And then I was surprised at how the German prisoners came and helped with the first aid. I sort of knew, I'd seen photographs of Germans holding stretchers and stuff, but I didn't quite realise the extent of, like, German first aid guys who were captured would have pitched in with the British first aid guys. No Tommies with bayonets, they would just be there, free walking around. And you had German medics and British medics helping to save the lives of German and British soldiers. The attitude towards the Germans, you remind yourself that World War II with the Nazis was sort of like largely a war of hate in many ways, and there wasn't. But this war, that it was obviously, if a German killed your friend, then you're going to hate him. I mean, it's not, there's no easy way to describe everything, but certainly you understand it from a political point of view. These guys, they didn't naturally, the British didn't naturally regard the enemy as the Germans as an enemy that they should hate, and nor did the Germans. So they actually both had some empathy for each other because they were both in the same conditions, same food, same everything else, and that was sort of a little bit surprising. The surprising thing about the Prussians, because Germany, I didn't realize. I always thought it was Germans, and then these guys say the barbarians were nice, Saxons were great, the Prussians were bastards. That was the first time I really kind of had, and that was like 3 or 4 different guys saying that. I didn't quite, it was the first time I actually thought about that, because Germany was a young country, wasn't it? Only like 40 years old or something, and it was very much all these states had come together to form the country, and they still had all these internal rivalries. And then the other thing that surprised me was on Armistice Day, into the war, they're not cheering and yelling and waving flags and hooting. That's what the image, and that was certainly happening in Trafalgar Square here with the civilians. I mean, that was certainly the case. But on the Western Front, the soldiers they couldn't actually process the end of the war. Good or bad, they just couldn't. It would just happen. It just suddenly crept up on them, and it was completely over. This 4 years of incredible intensity was just suddenly finished, and you could sort of, as they say, it was like a vacuum. They didn't quite know what to do. That surprised me. So yeah, so to answer your question, yes, there was lots of things that surprised me.
One thing that keeps coming up that really stuck with the film was all the anecdotal elements of it, like when the young soldiers were too young and told to go outside and have their birthday or things like that. What really do you think made them so eager to sign up?
It was an event. I mean, it's hard because there's cliches about this stuff. You've got to be careful. But it's just, imagine if any of you, your friends are going off doing something and you're going to be left out. You want to run along and do it. I mean, they weren't doing it for reasons of politics. They weren't saying, "Yeah, I'm going to go fight because because the German government are not behaving very well and they need to be put in their place." Whatever. I mean, I think very few of them even had that thought. It was all about around them, friends were going in, and you were going to look like a real prat if you didn't go in. And they said, one of the descriptions in there, which I think is interesting too, is that they all regarded it like one big long scout camp with a little bit of danger thrown in to spice things up. That's sort of how they felt about it. So I don't think any of them went in there thinking it was going to be as brutal and rough as it was. But they also didn't want to. They wanted to stay with their mates. Just wanted to stay with their friends. I'm not sure. I mean, it's very complex, that stuff, and I always feel like you're going into the cliche stuff too. I just be a bit careful, but they explain it. The 7 or 8 or 9 guys that we use are very representative of everybody, and they explain it far better than I can, really.
Who in here would definitely not sign up if the government wanted you to? Definitely not. Okay, interesting. Do you why?
But you see, what they said, sign up if the government wanted you to, but what's they signing up if your best friends? If your best friends were going,
what if all of your mates were joining up? Would you still be the one who went, "No, I don't fancy it"?
I mean, that's the trick. That's the tricky thing. That it's hard to kind of imagine, because that's an emotional thing, a spur of the moment. That's the interesting question. Yeah.
You're braver than I'm one of the sheep. I do whatever I'm told by my mates.
I think these days kids are a lot more independent than back then. Back then
all right,
it was
man.
all like mob mentality.
Make me feel old. Listen, in the 90s, I was a very independent guy.
No, I'm sure.
that,
Yeah,
right?
I'm talking 100 years ago.
Yeah. No, I think that's right.
Yeah, and I mean, as one of the guys says at the beginning, we were raised to believe that one British person was worth 10 Germans, and and yet my son, he's in his 20s now, but he would be playing PlayStation with his headphones on, and there'd be German guys, Russian people, Japanese people, and he's playing PlayStation, with these people around him. I mean, the world is a very different place now. I think younger people. We sound old, don't we? I think younger people have a much better understanding that we're all one people on a planet, and that you can, people can relate to each other. And the one thing that the internet and the games and all that sort of done is allowed all sorts of people from different countries to communicate with each other, which never happened before. Your thoughts about the Germans were what the government told you to think. But now you're going to have your own thoughts because you're going to have friends that are German or whatever or whoever. It's like I think people today have a much more international kind of a focus. So you would hope that would be the end to wars, but unfortunately it doesn't seem to be. It's
Do you want to go for it, Ben?
Well, so you're talking about like wars these days and how the soldiers back then were completely just dismissed by society. Do you think that nowadays society might be better equipped to deal with the after effects of conflict?
Don't know. I mean, I'm actually, and I seriously don't know because I haven't really looked and studied it. And obviously, we are in a situation where there are still soldiers, including our British soldiers coming home from after fighting. Now, Dan could probably answer it better than I could. I mean, the interesting thing that I took from that is when I was a kid, there were First World War veterans around. There was old Alf Fuller on the park bench who had been coughing every day, and I was young. I mean, I wish I could have. Wish I was old as I am now and asked some questions. But anyway, there was a whole sense when I grew up of these guys don't want to talk about it. It must be so horrible. Don't even go there. These guys don't want to talk about the war. But then listening to these guys, it's almost like it's not that they didn't want to talk about it because they were personally traumatized. Now, obviously a lot were. I mean, this is not across the board, but they didn't want to talk about it because it was a waste of time. That they just said you try to talk to a civilian and no one was really interested. They didn't know a thing. Their eyes glazed over. You were erased apart. So I can imagine, and I think it's interesting. Is that the reason why they weren't talking about it? Because when I was a kid, I thought it was all because they had such horrific time that they were still traumatized at the age of 85, and I wonder if that's actually the truth now, that they simply didn't talk about it because they never spoke about it because it was a waste. What's the point of talking about something if the person isn't interested and doesn't care and doesn't understand? Just keep your mouth shut. It's so I wonder.
Well, I don't know much either, but I know now the NHS works with helping people with PTSD and stuff like that. And PTSD wasn't really recognised at all back then, it seems.
Yep. No. I mean, shell shock is slightly different. We all hear about shell shock, which is something we didn't actually have in our movie. So many things we didn't put in the film. I mean, I only just managed to squeeze gas in at the last minute, but shell shock, as far as I'm aware, shell shock is actually the physical, the concussion of these shells almost destroy your nervous system. They can cut the punch of these shells. That physically, your nervous system gets sort of shredded, and so you start to kind of shake. And you're not shaking because you're scared, or you're actually shaking because you can't stop shaking because your body has been pummeled by the concussion of these shells. So, as far as is that right? That shell shock's a little different to PTSD. I mean,
it's an instantaneous psychiatric breakdown.
It's a physical effect, whereas there's also the emotional effects and the mental effects, which is more what we understand to be post-traumatic stress, which is a whole different thing than shell shock really, isn't it? Really, to some degree.
Yeah.
Because you actually never hear about shell shock now, but you hear a lot about post-traumatic stress, and you wonder does shell shock still exist? Because presumably these soldiers today are still under shell fire. I mean, I don't know.
I've just made a program about that, Peter. So I'll tell you about that. Now, who here studied the First World War at school? Pretty much everyone. Did this film reinforce what you know? Did it transform the way you see the war? Put your hands up if you think it transformed it, or did it reinforce what you've already? Put your hands up if you think it's reinforced what you've already studied at school? Okay, so that's interesting. So most of you are on the right track. Why is it important that this room, all of us, Why should we if we're all hanging out with each other on the internet and we're all more independent, why do we have to study the First World War? Why do we bother? Should we see this suffering?
Well, I mean, I'd like to ask a question, but I don't know quite how to phrase it. I mean, I would imagine that most of you, your school studies, the First World War, it's a lot about dates, strategies, first day of the Somme, Passchendaele was happening on this date. It's a lot about the sort of the political, why the war happened, and the way that things unfolded because of the tactics involved. I imagine, is that right? Is that you're taught a global view of the First World War? Because I mean, I bet you weren't taught about guys on a pole doing a poos, were you? I mean, you know what I mean. And I don't know whether this film is really. I mean, what I'm hoping is this film is another side of the First World War to anything that you are taught. I'm hoping this is a personal, human side, which is probably, I'm guessing, not probably where schools go. Schools would go, the Somme was on the 1st of July, this is how many soldiers were killed, blah, blah, blah. And I'm hoping that this, and that's all, it's fine. And if you're interested in that, that's great. But I'm hoping that this movie is more of these people, these were human beings, and this is what the human experience was. That's what I tried to do. Okay,
let's go for some more data here. Hands up if you're interested in what Peter was talking about, which is why the Allies won, what was going on, the politics, the tactics. Put your hands up if you're interested in that side of it, mainly. Couple of hands. Put your hands up if what you're interested in is trench foot, gas, poos, chasing women, drinking. All right, so
who's drinking, who's chasing women?
Okay, so you people find that a lot more accessible.
Well, as humans, I mean, it's what this film I hope would do is that if in some weird time machine, any of you found yourself going to the First World War, that this film represents what you would experience, and you have to realize that as I say, the soldier in the trenches was told nothing. It was a policy of the government because you didn't want to tell soldiers anything because if they got captured by the Germans and interrogated, you didn't want them to know anything. So there was an absolute, as the soldiers said, they didn't, that we didn't care who was actually winning the war. That was not something we even thought about. It was a day to day, what's happening to you, So, I mean, what I'm hoping this film is it gives you an insight into if, for whatever reason, any of you suddenly found yourself in the First World War, this is what you could expect to experience. And you don't have to know anything about it. You don't have to know the date of the Somme. You don't have to know how many people died in Passchendaele. These guys didn't know. I mean, they had no idea. So that's what the point of this film is to try to just to give you a picture of if you were there, this is what you would have gone through. Now, beyond that, most of you, if you know it or not, have probably got family that were there. Probably, and look at you, probably great grandparents, great uncles. I mean, you may not know that you have, but you probably did, and maybe they survived. Maybe someone died, and you may not even know who they are. You might not have a clue, but if you can, try to investigate because that film you've just seen could have been your family experience. It could have been, people in your family that actually that went through that.
Yeah, the useful advice from Peter Jackson. If you do invent a time machine, don't set the dial for 14 to 18. Choose some other time, guys. But sorry, can I get you back to that question as well, which apart from that time machine, which is a useful point, but why is it important for all of us, not just geeks like me, why is it important for all of us to study this, hear these experiences and watch this?
Well, I mean, look, I would argue that it's not hugely important for anyone to know the date of the Somme. I mean, I think if you're interested, you should, and I think there's historians that take care of that. And if at any point in your lives you're interested, there's dozens of books about it. I mean, I just think that one of the things that I kind of feel that I watch First World War movies, sort of Hollywood films, with actors and everything. And what sort of irritates me and annoys me when I ever watch them is there's no humour. They go straight for the cliche, which is guys in mud, hell on earth, over the top, barbed wire machine. Everyone's miserable as hell, but that's not actually. That is actually a very inaccurate. That's not what the First World War was like because I get angry. I get angry when I watch films that are humorless films. Now that sounds really weird, the funny side of the First World War, but it's not. The First World War was funny, but the soldiers coped with it with using humour, and that's very apparent in what you've just seen. And that's usually missing from World War I movies, and so I think it's important to humanise it. And that's because their First World War Hollywood films are not. They're going for the cliche again. They're going for the victimisation and the misery, and you can be miserable and still joke with your mates. I mean, that's what there's the missing element of that. So I just wanted to try to put that back into people's thoughts again. And it's not me doing it, actually. It's them doing it. I don't have an agenda in this film, and they say it for themselves, really.
Ben, last 5 minutes. What do you got?
Well,
give us the curly ones, Ben. Give us the tricky ones. Come on.
Oh well, it really. When I watched this last week, I felt like it was the best depiction ever. A lot of that, I think, was down to not just the story, but the way it was told visually. Like with this new digitalization of the old footage, as well as the audio, when you can hear what they're actually saying at the time, brings an entire new dimension to what we think about.
Well, we can't really hear what they were saying. What Ben's meaning is that the footage is all silent, right? So they're talking silently. And so we got people that can read lips as professional lip readers that do work for the police and things. We got them to look at it, and they would come back and say, well, this soldier's saying this soldier's saying that. And we got actors to do those voices, and you're right, because the person does the words, and it completely fits with the lips. So hey, yeah. So we're not hearing them. We're hearing actors who are providing their voices on their behalf. But we hope it's as accurate to what they were really saying. Yeah, sorry, Ben.
No, that's fine. That's what I meant.
Yeah.
Okay.
And can I just say one other thing just before you go on, because it's a point that I think is important, because we're going on about, I said how surprising it was that they all said, oh, well, I'd do it all over again, it was the best time of my life, it was fun and everything else. I mean, we're hearing the voices of the survivors. I think the men who died, who never had a life, who didn't have children, who didn't get to enjoy the rest of life, who died at the age of 17, 18, 19, I think they wouldn't feel like that. So it's very important to understand that the opinions here are the opinions of the guys that came back and survived. I think if you asked a soldier who had just died, well, is this the best thing that you've ever done? I don't think they would be saying, yep. I don't think they'd be saying it. So there's another part of the war who the million people that died, I don't think would actually agree with a lot of what these guys are saying, and unfortunately we don't have their voices, we don't have their recordings. So this is not trying to present the First World War as a sort of this is the truth of it. It's the truth of it with the individuals that are talking, but the people that aren't talking are the people that died, who might have a whole different point of view.
Can I ask about technology, because you're at the very cutting edge of what's happening? I mean, what can we got? This is 3D. It's enhanced. It's slowed down. It's steadied. It's wonderful. What can we? What's the future hold? What one day are we going to be interacting with these people?
I'm not sure, but I don't. You mean future technology? Oh my God, I don't know, because once you start getting into that, you're getting into CGI and animation, and you're not using the real guys. But the one thing, to answer your question in a totally different way, I mean, what I hope as a history geek and probably is that other archives around the world who are sitting on amazing footage will sit up and think, oh, we can restore our footage like this. I mean, it's actually what I think that one of the things I want this film to do is for every film archive in the world that's sitting on film, not just First World War film. There's film of Queen Victoria's Jubilee. There's all sorts of wonderful historical film, all of which could be kind of restored like this. Let's start restoring all this old film. I mean, because it's all been sitting there as jerky old black and white. Doesn't have to be. Can be transformed like this. Not necessarily the colour. I mean, colour's expensive. You can stop at the black and white, but the black and white restoration looks fantastic. So what I'm hoping to get, one of the side effects I'm hoping, it'll be interesting to see, is if a lot of other archives around the world suddenly sit up and think, oh, we'd like to have our archive restored in the way that this has been done, and that would be cool. Imagine if everything was done like that. I mean, it would be cool.
That would be awesome.
And it's not impossible. It's not too hard.
Anything quick at the end?
I really like this. Yeah.
Nice one.
Oh,
that's a penetrating question. All right, everyone. Well, Ben, you'll be watching the new host of Question Time on the BBC. I just want to say, on behalf of Ben and I, thank you for coming today. On behalf of the entire audience, Peter, we are all so grateful that you put in as much time. It was free. You did this for all of us, and as a result, we can all understand, appreciate, and watch this content and get closer to the war, I think, than we've ever been able to before.
But,
so
but
thank
also,
you very much.
also, I would thank you for coming, because I could easily have made this film and be sitting here with a completely empty theatre. So thank you for caring, and thank you for your interest, and I hopefully it inspires more interest. Find out about your own families. The only message I'd say at the end of the day is forget those politics, forget the reasons why the war started or finished. Just find out if you had a great-great-grandfather, great-great-uncle. Find out, because it makes you be amazed at the stories that you can unfold about your own family, your DNA. You are carrying their DNA, and if you're not interested, if you think you're not interested, I guarantee you'll be surprised. You will be surprised. Just dig deep.
And that's not just people from white British backgrounds, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Africans. The first shot of the British Army fired in the First World War was by an African private in West Africa. And there were hundreds of thousands of Chinese labourers here. This is not a story just for...
No, I mean, that's something we don't touch on. There were South African labourers, there were West Indian. I mean, there was the British Empire called on everybody that it had under its thumb at that stage, including the Kiwis and then the Maoris. They and everybody. So there's you don't have to be a Brit. It was a genuine world war. So.
Well, thank you for coming, and thank you, Peter, again, and thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Dan.